Ross Ulbricht, the man behind the legend. In the hidden corners of the internet, far beyond Google searches and everyday websites, something remarkable was growing. Something that would change the way we think about crime, money, and freedom. And it was controlled by a single man, sitting quietly behind a laptop. Ross Ulbricht wasn't always Dread Pirate Roberts. He was a curious, intelligent, and idealistic young man from Austin, Texas. Fascinated by economics, libertarian philosophy, and the concept of personal freedom, Ross dreamed of creating a marketplace free from government oversight, a digital utopia where voluntary trade could thrive without interference. Before Silk Road existed, Ross experimented on a much smaller scale. He began growing magic mushrooms, selling them online anonymously. This wasn't about greed, it was about testing a simple idea. Could people buy and sell goods safely and privately in an online system no one could shut down? These mushrooms were the first seeds of what would grow into Silk Road. Ross knew that anonymity alone wouldn't make the marketplace successful. People needed to find it. He posted mysterious, cryptic messages on forums like Shroomery and Bitcoin Talk, hinting at a revolutionary marketplace where people could buy anything they wanted, legally or not, and remain invisible. At this stage, Ross had help. His girlfriend, Julia, provided emotional support, listening as he wrestled with the technical challenges and ethical dilemmas of building a black market empire. And then there was Erica, a close friend of Julia's, who learned pieces of Ross's secret life through conversations with Julia. Erica didn't buy drugs. She wasn't involved in Silk Road. She was simply someone who saw, through her friend, the growing obsession consuming Ross's life. The name, Dread Pirate Roberts, came from a conversation with Variety Jones, a mysterious mentor and advisor who would shape Silk Road's early structure. The alias wasn't just a pseudonym, it was a legend. In the movie The Princess Bride, the name is passed down from one pirate to another, leaving the world uncertain about the true identity of the leader. Variety Jones wanted the same for Ross. A mythical figure, untouchable and eternal. Ross's early challenges weren't only technical. His family was unaware of the illegal activities he was pursuing. He told them he was building a startup, a business for the future. But the weight of secrecy, combined with the pressure of creating a global marketplace, began to isolate him. By 2011, the first version of Silk Road was live. Vendors began to list products, from magic mushrooms to cannabis and eventually harder substances. For a brief moment, guns were even listed on the site. Though Ross eventually banned them, they were too risky and difficult to transport. Silk Road wasn't just a website. It was a vision, Ross's vision, of a digital market free from regulation. And at the very beginning, it was fragile, small, and fueled by idealism. The birth of Silk Road, operations and early economy. By late 2011, Silk Road had quietly grown from a concept into a functioning marketplace. Ross, now fully embracing his alias Dread Pirate Roberts, had set up a system that was both simple and revolutionary. Users could buy and sell items anonymously using Bitcoin, the digital currency that offered a layer of secrecy traditional banking could not. Ross's genius lay in combining three critical elements: anonymity, trust, and reputation. Vendors built feedback scores, buyers left reviews, and everyone understood the rules of the marketplace. Early advertising was subtle. Ross posted on forums frequented by libertarians, hackers, and digital drug communities. He used pseudonyms and avoided any direct exposure. Variety Jones, his enigmatic advisor, helped craft the structure, offering guidance on security protocols and vendor management. Initially, the marketplace was small. Most users were buying mushrooms, the very products Ross had tested years before. But the word spread fast. Within months, the site expanded to include cannabis, psychedelics, prescription drugs, and even illicit goods such as firearms, though guns were later removed for legal and logistical reasons. Ross's girlfriend Julia was aware of parts of this evolution. She saw how consumed he had become, the long nights coding and troubleshooting, and the careful way he tried to avoid detection. And through Julia, Erica also learned fragments of the truth, though she never purchased anything herself. Silk Road's economy quickly became a bustling black market. Buyers and sellers relied on Bitcoin escrow, where the platform held funds until transactions were completed satisfactorily. This reduced scams and gave users confidence to conduct high-value transactions without meeting physically. Vendors ranged from small-time hobbyists selling mushrooms to more serious operators handling kilograms of controlled substances. Ross faced constant operational challenges. Technical failures, vendor disputes, and the difficulty of keeping servers hidden and untraceable threatened the platform regularly. Yet he remained committed, often telling his family he was working on an innovative startup for digital commerce, a partial truth designed to hide the scale of what he was building. Communication with vendors was delicate. Early on, Ross personally moderated disputes, sometimes staying awake for days responding to inquiries. His dedication built trust, but also increased exposure risk. Security was paramount. Any slip could compromise the network or reveal his identity. The site's early advertising was tactical. Ross used coded language on forums, promoted Silk Road indirectly, and relied on word of mouth. Vendors were encouraged to maintain professionalism, to avoid drawing law enforcement attention, and to foster a sense of community. Variety Jones occasionally suggested strategies to grow the user base while maintaining anonymity, reinforcing Ross's belief that Silk Road could be both profitable and insulated from legal scrutiny. By 2012, Silk Road had grown beyond a small underground experiment. It was now a global marketplace, with thousands of transactions occurring every week. Users could purchase everything from recreational drugs to prescription medications. Escrow services, rating systems, and encrypted messaging created a sophisticated network operating under the radar of law enforcement. This rapid growth also brought the first major operational dilemmas. Vendors began testing the boundaries of the platform, trying to push prohibited items or to scam buyers. Ross, as Dread Pirate Roberts, had to make judgment calls, balancing the risk to the platform with the need to maintain trust. He even removed gun listings entirely after realizing the potential for serious federal prosecution, an early lesson in the dangerous scale his creation was reaching. In these early stages, Silk Road's economy was fragile but revolutionary. Ross's vision of a decentralized, anonymous marketplace was beginning to take shape, but the complexity of running a global black market meant that every decision could have consequences, both for the site and for himself personally. The teenage tragedy. As Silk Road continued to grow, its reach extended far beyond the hidden corners of the internet. The anonymous marketplace began affecting real lives in ways Ross could never have anticipated. Among the most tragic was the story of a teenage boy who would never return home. It started innocuously. A friend of the boy had acquired a controlled substance through Silk Road. This friend, acting out of curiosity and peer influence, offered the drug to the boy. Initially hesitant, the teenager eventually accepted, not fully aware of the potency or risks involved. That night, the two boys prepared to attend a school dance, eager for fun and social connection. The drug was taken in private, in the hours before the event. Almost immediately, the boy experienced severe disorientation, dizziness, and confusion. His friend panicked as he watched the teenager lose control. Once at the dance, the effects worsened. In a moment of tragic accident, the boy fell from a balcony, suffering catastrophic injuries. Emergency services were called, but it was too late. He died at the scene. This tragedy highlighted the unintended consequences of an anonymous online marketplace. Silk Road had provided the means, but the chain of events involved multiple decisions and social dynamics, peer pressure, curiosity, and the lack of adult supervision, all converging in a single heartbreaking night. Ross, of course, did not know the identities of individual users. He had never met the boy, nor had he orchestrated the circumstances that led to his death. Yet, in the public imagination, the link between Silk Road and this incident would become emblematic of the platform's perceived dangers. In the personal world surrounding Ross, Julia had begun to notice how intense and consuming his life had become. Erica, a friend of Julia's, learned pieces of Ross's secret world through conversations with Julia. Erica was not involved in any Silk Road transactions, she never bought drugs, but she became aware of how the marketplace's shadow reached into real lives, including minors. Julia's concerns grew as Ross became increasingly absorbed in site management, vendor disputes, and security measures. This incident also underscored the complexity of operating Silk Road. Every decision, from vendor approval to product listing, carried weight. Each transaction had consequences, sometimes unforeseen and tragic. The death of the boy, caused by the combination of a Silk Road acquired substance, peer influence, and the accident at the school dance, was a stark reminder of the stakes at play. It was a turning point in the narrative of Silk Road, a moment where the digital world collided violently with the real world. For Ross, the platform remained a tool of libertarian vision and economic freedom. For the victims, families, and friends affected, it was a source of pain, loss, and a reminder of the consequences of anonymous commerce. As the platform expanded, so did the scope of its influence, and so did the attention from law enforcement. Unbeknownst to Ross, his world of encrypted transactions, anonymous users, and coded messages was on the radar of multiple agencies, setting the stage for the investigation that would eventually unravel Silk Road from the inside. While Silk Road quietly expanded into a global marketplace, a team of federal agents in Baltimore was meticulously piecing together the puzzle. Among them were Sean Bridges and Karl Mark Force 4, part of a task force charged with investigating online drug trafficking and digital crime. Their target was not just Silk Road's creator. They were also watching the inner circle of administrators who kept the site running smoothly. One key figure in this investigation was Curtis Clark Green, known online as Flush and Chronic Pain. Green served as a Silk Road administrator, managing vendor disputes, overseeing user accounts, and maintaining internal systems. His access to the inner workings of the platform made him a critical link for law enforcement, and it would also make him a pawn in one of the most unusual episodes of the Silk Road investigation. Baltimore agents identified Green through careful monitoring of Silk Road communications and vendor activity. They noticed patterns in transactions and administrative logins that pointed toward a Utah-based administrator. To secure a legal basis for arrest, agents orchestrated an undercover operation. They arranged to send a 1-kilogram cocaine shipment directly to Green's home. On January 17, 2013, Green received the package, unaware that it was a carefully planned sting. Federal agents immediately raided his home, arresting him for possession and distribution of cocaine. The seizure provided probable cause, as the package contained roughly $27,000 worth of the substance. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Green agreed to cooperate. He provided his Silk Road admin credentials, giving the task force insight into internal accounts, vendor transactions, and encrypted communications. Once in custody, Green became central to the corrupt actions of some members of the task force. Bridges and Force, exploiting Green's access, began siphoning Silk Road Bitcoin for personal gain. They manipulated transactions, making it appear as though Green had betrayed Silk Road. Ross, unaware of the law enforcement deception, believed that an administrator had stolen from him, a belief that would later fuel the staged murder-for-hire subplot. This operation demonstrated a disturbing mix of legitimate law enforcement investigation and outright corruption. While agents were tasked with dismantling a major online drug marketplace, they simultaneously engaged in schemes that compromised their integrity and violated Green's rights. The arrest of Curtis Green was pivotal. It not only provided authorities with critical inside knowledge of Silk Road operations but also created the circumstances for one of the most bizarre and misleading narratives Ross would encounter: the fabricated assassination of an administrator who was, in reality, safely in custody. Baltimore's role in the Silk Road investigation was therefore double-edged. On one hand, agents were conducting legitimate investigative work, exposing a global criminal network. On the other, corruption within the task force led to theft, deception, and the creation of a fake death scenario that would manipulate Ross and complicate his eventual legal defense. By the time Curtis Green was under arrest, the stage was set for a complex convergence of crime, deception, and tragedy, with Ross Ulbricht caught in the middle, operating under the belief that his anonymous world was impervious to law enforcement scrutiny. The arrest of Curtis Green gave Baltimore agents an opportunity far beyond a simple administrative takedown. While Green was securely in custody in Utah, Karl Mark Force 4 and Sean Bridges, both Baltimore-based investigators, devised a plan to manipulate Ross Ulbricht into believing that Silk Road had been compromised from within and that lives were at stake. Ross had already built a sense of trust around his administrators. Curtis Green, known as Chronic Pain, was one of the most trusted moderators. When Ross received reports of missing Bitcoin, Force, operating under the guise of a criminal associate, claimed that Green had stolen funds from Silk Road. Ross, believing the claims and fearing the integrity of his platform, was drawn into a complex and sinister web. To make the threat real, the Baltimore agents staged photos of Curtis Green supposedly dead. In reality, Green was alive and unharmed, sitting under law enforcement custody in Utah. The images were taken under careful supervision, simulating a murder for hire. Blood, positioning, and props were used to create the illusion of death. This staged death served a dual purpose. It manipulated Ross emotionally and allowed Force and Bridges to further exploit Silk Road Bitcoin without immediate suspicion. Ross, operating as Dread Pirate Roberts, believed he was dealing with a violent world where betrayal could mean murder. Around the same time, other vendor narratives played into the tension. Figures such as Friendly Chemist and Red and White appeared in communications, representing typical Silk Road vendors. These accounts were sometimes used by Force and Bridges to manipulate the flow of transactions, creating confusion for Ross and reinforcing the belief that administrators were untrustworthy. Vendors were unaware that some of these interactions were being influenced by corrupt agents. Ross, overwhelmed by the platform's growth and the apparent betrayal of trusted associates, began considering extreme measures. He contemplated whether action needed to be taken against those he thought were stealing from the site. All of this unfolded under the false narrative created by Baltimore agents. The psychological impact was profound. Ross had built Silk Road on trust, transparency, within his anonymous framework, and a reputation system. Suddenly, the very people he depended upon, administrators like Green, were painted as traitors. Yet behind the scenes, the real traitors were supposedly upholding the law, but secretly profiting from theft and deception. This manipulation highlights the dangerous intersection of corruption and digital crime. Ross's decisions, made in good faith to protect his platform, were shaped by lies and false evidence. The staged death of Curtis Green remains one of the most extraordinary examples of law enforcement deception in cybercrime history, showing how even the most secure, anonymized systems can be exploited by those with physical access and unchecked authority. Through all of this, Ross's personal world continued to unravel. His relationship with Julia, his girlfriend, was strained by secrecy, obsession with Silk Road, and the moral weight of running a marketplace that had real-world consequences. Julia's friend Erica learned fragments of the story from Julia, but she remained an outside observer, never involved in Silk Road transactions herself. Ross's early experimentation with drugs, guns, and Bitcoin had created a platform unlike any other, a digital empire built on anonymity and trust, but it had also exposed him to the human and systemic vulnerabilities that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The combination of internal platform stress, external law enforcement manipulation, and personal isolation created a perfect storm. Ross, the idealistic founder, now faced a world where deception, corruption, and tragedy intersected in ways he could never have anticipated. By 2012, Ross Ulbricht's creation had grown far beyond his small experiments with mushrooms. Silk Road had evolved into a global digital marketplace, but with this growth came enormous challenges. Vendors were testing limits, users demanded faster service, and every new transaction carried legal risk. Managing the platform required constant vigilance, and the weight of responsibility began to strain every aspect of Ross's life. Complicating matters, Julia, Ross's girlfriend, had begun voicing concerns. The secrecy, the obsession, and the moral implications of running a black market empire created tension. She confided in her friend Erica, who learned fragments of Ross's secret life but had no direct involvement in Silk Road. Julia eventually left Ross, frustrated by the secrecy and the consuming nature of his work. A brief attempt at reconciliation in 2012 failed, leaving Ross increasingly isolated. Ross's family also remained largely unaware of his true activities. He told them he was building a startup, a company focused on innovation in digital commerce. They saw a talented, intelligent man working late hours and occasionally traveling. They had no idea about the thousands of transactions happening under his pseudonym, or the dangerous people he was indirectly interacting with through Silk Road. At the same time, federal investigators had begun paying attention. One of the first agents to notice Silk Road's potential was an IRA agent, tasked with monitoring illicit activity online. This agent traced patterns of Bitcoin transfers and online advertisements, identifying Silk Road as a platform of interest. The IRA agent's investigation helped set the stage for U.S. federal involvement, eventually feeding critical intelligence to the Baltimore Task Force. Without this early attention, Ross might have remained insulated longer. Operationally, Ross faced continuous challenges: maintaining server anonymity while avoiding IP leaks, moderating disputes among vendors and buyers, responding to technical outages or encryption failures, balancing risk with expansion, particularly as higher-stakes products like prescription drugs and controlled substances were added. Despite these pressures, Ross attempted to uphold the principles of his marketplace: anonymity, fairness, and trust. He implemented escrow systems, vendor ratings, and strict rules prohibiting violence or harm. Yet the complexity of managing a global underground market meant that mistakes, misunderstandings, and tragedies, like the death of the teenage boy, were inevitable. By this stage, Ross had also embraced the Dread Pirate Roberts identity fully, understanding that his personal safety depended on maintaining an untouchable persona. It was not just a pseudonym. It was a psychological shield, a way to separate Ross Ulbricht the man from the legendary figure running Silk Road. All of these pressures, from the early attention of the IRA agent to the strain of his personal relationships and the constant operational challenges, combined to form a crucible, Ross was a visionary navigating a dangerous digital frontier, unaware that forces from law enforcement, corrupt agents, and the outside world were closing in. By 2013, Silk Road had grown into an unstoppable digital empire. Tens of thousands of users, thousands of vendors, and millions of dollars in transactions flowed through the site each month. Ross Ulbricht, operating under the mythic alias Dread Pirate Roberts, had created a marketplace unlike any other, blending anonymity, trust, and global reach. Yet the very success that made Silk Road legendary also made it vulnerable. Despite the layers of encryption, Tor routing, and offshore servers, law enforcement began to close in. One breakthrough came when investigators traced one of Silk Road's primary servers to Iceland, while other mirrored servers operated across Europe. The offshore hosting was intended as a shield, but it provided authorities with critical information about the site's structure and allowed them to identify patterns that eventually pointed back to the administrator. Meanwhile, Ross was still absorbed in running the platform. He personally managed vendor disputes, monitored Bitcoin escrow accounts, and maintained security protocols. The complexity of the operation left little room for personal life. His relationship with Julia had already ended, leaving him isolated, and his family remained largely unaware of the scale of his activities. Only a few close associates, including administrators like Curtis Green, knew the full scope, though Green was already in custody, manipulated by corrupt agents into a fake death scenario. Silk Road's operations had also drawn the attention of a growing coalition of investigators. The IRA agent, who first noticed the suspicious Bitcoin transfers and online activity, had passed intelligence along to federal authorities. Combined with the Baltimore Task Force's operations and the trace of servers in Iceland and Europe, law enforcement had the pieces they needed to target Ross directly. The investigation relied heavily on digital forensics. Investigators examined Bitcoin transactions, server logs, and forum posts. They pieced together the network of vendors and administrators, mapping activity across time zones and cryptocurrencies. The offshore servers provided valuable metadata, including IP connections and login timestamps, which eventually allowed law enforcement to narrow their search to a physical location in San Francisco. The arrest operation was meticulously planned. On October 1, 2013, Ross Ulbricht was apprehended in a San Francisco library. Authorities had coordinated to ensure that he could not destroy his laptop or access Silk Road one last time. When they approached, Ross was logged in as Dread Pirate Roberts, actively managing transactions and responding to user inquiries. The moment of capture was almost cinematic. He was arrested while operating the empire he had built, surrounded by the tools of his digital world, unaware that the fall was inevitable. The seizure included laptops, external drives, and access to thousands of encrypted communications. Bitcoin wallets containing millions of dollars were frozen. This digital treasure trove gave authorities insight not just into Silk Road's transactions, but into the very mindset of its creator. For the first time, investigators could see the full scope of the marketplace, the billions of dollars in sales, the trusted administrators, and the carefully constructed reputation system that Ross had maintained. For Ross personally, the arrest was a sudden collision between his idealistic vision and the reality of law enforcement. He had believed that encryption, anonymity, and his own operational discipline could shield him. Yet the combination of offshore servers traced to Iceland, investigative breakthroughs by the IRA agent, and the coordinated sting operations had left him exposed. Every careful decision, from escrow systems to the banning of guns, to the creation of Dread Pirate Roberts, had been insufficient against a coalition of motivated and resourceful investigators. The aftermath of the arrest revealed both the scale of the Silk Road economy and the personal consequences for Ross. Millions of dollars in Bitcoin had been funneled through the platform, and the chain of digital transactions connected directly to purchases, some of which had tragic real-world outcomes, like the teenage boy who fell from a balcony after consuming a Silk Road-acquired substance. The human cost of the marketplace became part of the public narrative, adding layers of scrutiny and moral complexity to Ross's actions. Ross's arrest also highlighted the manipulation by corrupt agents. Curtis Green, though alive and in custody, had been framed in staged death photos. Bitcoin had been siphoned for personal gain by agents who were supposed to uphold the law. These revelations would later become central to appeals and public discussions about the investigation's ethics. Despite the collapse of his digital empire, Ross's idealism remained visible in his communications. He continued to see Silk Road as a platform for free trade, a digital marketplace shielded from government interference. His vision, however, had collided with legal, moral, and technological realities he could not fully control. Finally, the arrest set in motion a chain of legal events, indictments, trials, and sentencing. Ross faced multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to commit computer hacking, and conspiracy to traffic narcotics. The sheer volume of evidence, Bitcoin transactions, server logs, encrypted communications, and witness testimony created a nearly unassailable case against him. The fall of Silk Road was both dramatic and unprecedented. A young man from Austin, operating anonymously as Dread Pirate Roberts, had built a global marketplace in the shadows of the internet, only to be brought down by a combination of digital footprints, international server traces, corrupt and honest law enforcement, and a series of operational vulnerabilities. The empire he had built was frozen in time. A cautionary tale of ambition. With Ross Ulbricht in custody and Silk Road shut down, the legal machinery swung into full motion. The federal case against him was unprecedented in its scope and complexity. Prosecutors laid out an overwhelming body of evidence, hundreds of thousands of pages of chat logs, emails, server data, Bitcoin transactions, and witness testimony. Every layer of Silk Road's operations was exposed, from vendor management to the intricate web of cryptocurrency escrow accounts. The trial revealed the full picture of Ross's dual existence. Ross Ulbricht, the intelligent and idealistic entrepreneur, and Dread Pirate Roberts, the enigmatic operator of a digital black market. Testimony illustrated how he had maintained a meticulously structured platform, employing escrow systems, vendor ratings, and encrypted communications to protect both buyers and sellers. Yet the prosecution highlighted the human cost of his creation, including the tragic teenage boy who fell from a balcony and other indirect harms resulting from Silk Road transactions. Sentencing was dramatic. In 2015, Ross Ulbricht was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a sentence that sparked debate around proportionality, digital crime, and the moral weight of indirect harm. Judge Catherine Forrest described him as the creator of an empire that caused real-world consequences, but also acknowledged his intelligence and planning. The decision sent a message to the digital world. Even virtual empires could not escape the reach of law enforcement. Bitcoin, the lifeblood of Silk Road, became another point of fascination. During the investigation, law enforcement seized hundreds of thousands of bitcoins, worth hundreds of millions of dollars at the time. This unprecedented seizure underscored the transformative power of cryptocurrency and the legal complexities that arise when digital assets intersect with crime. Offshore servers, Tor networks, and anonymized payments could only shield Ross for so long. The combination of digital footprints and investigative diligence ultimately brought the empire down. The legacy of Silk Road is multi-layered. On one hand, it demonstrated the potential of decentralized, anonymous commerce. Ross's vision of a free, unregulated marketplace highlighted both the innovation and the risks inherent in such a system. On the other, it showcased the ethical dilemmas of digital anonymity, the unforeseen consequences of virtual actions on real-world lives, and the dangers of trusting unverified networks. Corruption within law enforcement, particularly the actions of the Baltimore-based agents Sean Bridges and Karl Mark Force 4, also complicated the narrative. Their manipulation of Curtis Green, theft of Silk Road Bitcoin, and staging of death photographs created a layer of deception that Ross had no way of anticipating. These events highlight the complexity of the Silk Road saga, a story not only of digital crime, but of human fallibility, corruption, and manipulation. Ross's personal life also remained a cautionary tale. His relationship with Julia had ended before his arrest, a casualty of secrecy, obsession, and the moral weight of his creation. His family, unaware of the digital empire he had built, were left grappling with the reality of his life sentence and the broader implications of his actions. For audiences reflecting on Silk Road today, there are lessons on multiple levels: the power of technology, the complexity of morality in digital spaces, and the interconnectedness of human behavior and digital innovation. Ross Ulbricht's story is a cautionary tale, a blend of ambition, vision, and the unavoidable consequences of decisions made in the shadows of the internet. As we look back, it's clear that Silk Road was more than a website. It was an experiment in trust, anonymity, and digital commerce, a platform that fundamentally changed the conversation around cryptocurrency, black markets, and the power of individual initiative. Yet, it was also a stark reminder that no system, no matter how cleverly designed, can fully escape the consequences of its actions. If this story captured your attention, imagine what the rest of the hidden histories of the internet might reveal. Stories like these show the collision of idealism, technology, and the human consequences that follow. So here's a question for you. If you were in Ross Ulbricht's shoes, would you risk everything to build a digital utopia, knowing the consequences could touch real lives? Drop your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation about ambition, technology, and morality. And don't forget, if you want more deep dives into the most shocking, complex true crime stories from the digital and real worlds, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are countless stories waiting to be told, and the truth is always stranger than fiction.